nobody warned Paris. That's the part that still doesn't make sense. A city that has hosted Napoleon's return, world wars, and the greatest sports moments in human history. And nothing prepared it for what walked through the doors of Charles de Gaulle Airport on an ordinary Tuesday night. Security had been briefed, organizers had made arrangements. And yet, when the first wave hit, every single plan collapsed within minutes. Glass windows shook, not from wind, not from construction, from voices. Thousands of them pressing from outside, chanting a name that most of France had only just begun to learn how to pronounce. And standing somewhere in the middle of that chaos, calm as still water while everything around her erupted, was a 20-year-old woman from Quezon City who had spent her whole life preparing for a moment she never once doubted would come. But here is what makes this story genuinely extraordinary. She hadn't won anything yet. Not a single match in France had been played. Not one ball had been struck on red clay. And yet the crowd waiting for her was the kind of crowd that world leaders and rock legends spend entire careers trying to earn. So the question that stopped French journalists cold, the question that flooded every sports desk and social media thread from Paris to Manila that night, was devastatingly simple. Who exactly is Alexandra Eala? And why does it feel like the whole world already knows the answer except us? To understand what happened in that airport, you cannot start with the airport. You have to start much earlier, in a quieter place, with a much smaller crowd, where a left-handed girl from the Philippines first decided that the word impossible was simply not part of her vocabulary. The Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, Spain sits on the edge of the Mediterranean, built on the philosophy that greatness is not given. It is constructed, brick by brick, through relentless repetition and mental endurance. Most young players who arrive there leave humbled. The training is designed to expose every weakness, strip away comfort, and rebuild athletes from the inside out. Alex Eala did not just survive that process. She thrived inside it in a way that made her coaches pay closer attention. There was something different about the way she absorbed pressure. While other students tensed under scrutiny, she seemed to sharpen. Her left-handed serve was already unusual, already creating angles that right-handed players simply cannot replicate. But it was her mind that set her apart. The ability to stay calm when logic says panic. The ability to attack when every instinct says retreat. Those qualities are not taught easily. They are either built through years of quiet suffering, or they arrive with someone almost naturally. With Eala, it appeared to be both. By the time she began competing at the junior level, whispers had started circulating within professional tennis circles. Quiet conversations between scouts and agents and coaches who had learned long ago to trust their instincts when something extraordinary was developing right in front of them. And then she won. Not once. Not in a small tournament with a forgettable draw. She won the Australian Open junior title. She became the first Filipino athlete in history to win a Grand Slam title of any kind. And in that single moment, everything changed for Alexandra Eala, and for an entire nation that had been waiting, perhaps without fully realizing it, for exactly this kind of symbol. But here is where the story begins to twist. Because winning. That title didn't create the phenomenon you saw in Paris. It lit a fuse. A slow-burning, quietly spreading fuse that traveled across oceans and time zones and Filipino communities scattered across every continent. The overseas Filipino worker is one of the most quietly powerful forces in modern global culture. There are millions of them living in Europe, the Middle East, North America, Asia. They send money home. They build their families from a distance. They carry homesickness like a second skin, never quite letting it show, because showing it means stopping, and stopping means the sacrifices were for nothing. For these people, sports is not entertainment. It is emotional survival. When a Filipino wins, they all win. When a Filipino stands on a world stage and refuses to be small, something unlocks inside every single one of them that cannot be described adequately in any language. Alex Eala didn't just win a junior Grand Slam, she handed millions of people scattered around the world a reason to feel seen, and they never forgot it. So when word spread that she would be competing in France, that she would be arriving at Charles de Gaulle on a specific night, the mobilization that followed was not spontaneous. It was organized with the kind of precision and emotional intensity that would make military planners raise an eyebrow. Filipinos in Paris reached out to Filipinos in Marseille. Communities in Lyon connected with supporters in Brussels and Amsterdam. Social media became the engine, but pride was the fuel. Jersey orders were placed weeks in advance. Philippine flags were imported in bulk. Chanting groups were rehearsed. And airport security, briefed on the possibility of a few hundred enthusiastic supporters, had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. French authorities reportedly revised their crowd estimates 3 times in the hours before her plane landed. 3 times. Each revision larger than the last. And still, when the doors opened and the sound hit them, everyone on duty described the same physical sensation. A wall, not of people, of emotion so concentrated and so loud that it registered as something almost physical pressing against you. Inside the terminal, cameras captured images that immediately began circulating globally. An elderly Filipino woman, perhaps 70 years old, tears streaming down her face, holding a handmade sign that read simply, "We are here, Alexa." Children sitting on their parents' shoulders, eyes wide, staring at this young woman moving through. The crowd with a composure that made the chaos around her look almost theatrical by comparison. Airport workers who had spent 20 years at Charles de Gaulle watching every kind of VIP arrival stepped out of their positions just to watch. One French journalist who had covered tennis for over a decade wrote that night that he had never, in his professional career, witnessed an athlete arrive anywhere the way Alexandra Eala arrived in Paris. And then came the moment everyone was waiting for, the moment she actually appeared. And here is what nobody expected. She smiled. Not a polished, camera-ready, PR-trained smile. A real one. Warm, genuine, slightly overwhelmed but nowhere near breaking. She moved through that roaring crowd with the quiet confidence of someone who had mentally rehearsed this moment not as a fantasy but as a destination. As if every early morning training session, every painful loss, every lonely night in Manacor had been a payment made toward exactly this. French reporters watching the scene struggled openly to process what they were seeing. Their tennis culture is built on a different emotional language. Polite applause, restrained appreciation, the gracious nod of recognition. What surrounded Alex Eala that night was a completely different frequency, raw and enormous and deeply human in a way that made several observers visibly emotional despite themselves. And within hours, the footage was everywhere. Every major sports network in Europe ran it. Social media algorithms, which are essentially machines designed to identify and amplify things that make people feel something, grabbed the footage and launched it across every platform simultaneously. The comment sections told their own story. French viewers expressing genuine shock, tennis fans from around the world asking how they had missed the rise of this player. Filipinos from every corner of the globe responding with the specific pride of people who had known all along. But something else was happening beneath the surface of the viral moment. Something that the view count and the share numbers couldn't fully capture. A conversation was beginning inside European tennis about what Alexandra Eala actually represents as a competitive force. Because while the world was focused on the crowds and the flags and the emotion, the people whose job it is to analyze tennis were looking at something else entirely. They were looking at her game. Her left-handed serve alone is a tactical problem that most opponents rarely prepare for properly. The angles it opens are geometrically different from a right-handed serve. The way it kicks wide to a right-handed opponent's backhand creates a vulnerability that is incredibly difficult to neutralize under match pressure. Combined with her baseline consistency, her ability to absorb pace and redirect it with precision, and the kind of relentless court coverage that only comes from years of clay court conditioning, what analysts were quietly discussing, having quiet, urgent conversations in the days following her arrival. The logistics of managing a crowd that behaves as a massive home section for a visiting player are genuinely complex. Roland Garros is built for passionate tennis audiences. It is not built for what essentially amounts to a national stadium atmosphere generating around a single competitor from outside France. The scheduling considerations alone became complicated. Which court do you assign to a match you know will draw thousands of flag-waving, chanting, singing supporters who will transform whatever space they occupy into something unrecognizable from a normal tennis venue? How do you balance the right of French players competing on home soil with the reality that tens of thousands of paying supporters have purchased tickets specifically to cheer for the opposition? These are not hypothetical problems. They are real logistical questions being asked by real people at the organizational level of French tennis. And the fact that they are being asked tells you more about the scale of the Alexandra Eala phenomenon than any view count ever could. But pull back further, past the logistics, past the competitive analysis, past even the viral footage, and something much larger comes into focus. Something that this story is really about underneath everything else. Sport, at its most powerful, has always been a mirror. It shows us what we value, what we fear, what we hope for, and who we believe ourselves to be. For Filipino supporters at that airport, the sight of Alexandra Eala walking through those doors was a reflection of themselves at their most hopeful. Every parent who left their children to work abroad, every professional who rebuilt their identity in a foreign country, every young Filipino who was told, in ways both direct and subtle, that their ceiling was lower than someone else's simply because of where they were born. When she walked through that terminal, calm and luminous and completely unafraid, she was answering all of those unspoken doubts simultaneously. She was saying, without a single word, "Watch what we can do when given the chance." That is not sports fandom. That is something older and deeper and more necessary than fandom. That is a people finding their reflection in someone brave enough to stand in a spotlight the size of the entire world and not flinch. And the French public, to their enormous credit, began to feel the weight of that. French culture has its own complicated relationship with immigration, with identity, with what it means to belong to a global community while protecting something locally precious. Watching the Filipino community arrive in such force, with such obvious love and discipline and unity, produced something unexpected in many French observers. Not resentment, not defensiveness, genuine admiration. The phrase that kept appearing in French coverage was belle invasion, beautiful invasion, used not as critique but as something closer to wonder. Because what arrived with Alexandra Eala was not a disruption of French tennis culture. It was a reminder of what sport looks like when it still means something enormous to the people watching it. And now, as Paris settles into the rhythm of the tournament, as the red clay courts begin to carry the prints of her shoes and the sound of her strikes, the question has evolved from who is she to something even more compelling. How far does this go? Because history has a way of choosing its moments carefully. It does not always announce them in advance. Sometimes the moment arrives looking like an airport crowd, like flags and noise and an emotional reception that confuses people who were not expecting it. Sometimes the moment looks exactly like this. A young woman from Quezon City, trained in Spain, arriving in France with the weight of a nation's dreams on her shoulders and somehow, making it look like the most natural thing in the world. Paris is famous for many things. Its light, its history, its ability to turn ordinary moments into legendary ones. But what it will remember about this particular week, long after the tournament results have faded, is the night the airport shook. The night tens of thousands of people reminded the world what it looks like when a community decides, all at once and completely without apology, that one of their own deserves to be seen. Alexandra Eala hasn't finished writing her story. She's barely begun the chapter that takes place in France. But the prologue was delivered in an airport terminal at midnight, and it was loud enough to echo across an entire continent. Whatever happens next on those clay courts, whatever scores get posted, and whatever history gets made or narrowly missed, one thing is already permanently true. The world knows her name now, and the world learned it the way all truly important names are learned. Not quietly, not gradually, all at once and with a sound you couldn't ignore even if you tried.